Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pink and Friday Night Preview Show, first one of 2021. So happy New Year to you if you're tuning in this evening. Of course, live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So if you've got any questions or comments about, which I expect a few of you will, given the current season we're in, then do get them into the comments, and we'll try and rattle through them as we can. We'll also, of course, be dissecting Daniel Farke's press conference and any other talking points that you wish us to talk about. Joined by Paddy Davitt and Pad, we've got to start really with the news that broke at midday today. 3 positive cases of coronavirus at Norwich City. Maybe not surprising, but how concerning do you think this is for Norwich City and Daniel Farke? Obviously, Tim Krul and Adam Eder, 2 players and a backroom staff member. How difficult is this going to make the next few weeks, do you feel?
Well, I mean, as you rightly say, it's probably where we are as a society. And Daniel Farke, again, having spoken at length about this whole topic this time last week prior to the Barnsley League game, where Barnsley were without 4 of their players due to what they called COVID-related issues. Subsequently, 2 of their players tested positive, 2 deemed close contacts. So he talked at length, but of course, roll it on a week, and it's come very close to home now with, as you rightly say, 2 players currently in self-isolation. And as Daniel said, it's probably a testament really to Norwich's protocols and how strict they have been around Colney, principally, obviously around that squad, that it's got to this point, and we're only really talking now about actual positive tests. You look at some of the other clubs just in the last few days. I mean, the whole scale of what's gone on at Villa and Derby and Sheffield Wednesday and Middlesbrough, the whole training grounds being closed because of outbreaks on a scale which has required that kind of treatment. Villa play Liverpool tonight. That's going ahead in the 3rd round of the FA Cup, but it's going to be their youth team because Dean Smith and all his coaching staff and all the players are currently, having to be in a period of potentially isolation, which I was reading on the BBC earlier on today. They're supposed to play Tottenham in the league next midweek. That game has to be in serious doubt. And this is the situation now moving forward. In the here and the now, it's, well, obviously Adam Eder was injured anyway, so he wouldn't have been available tomorrow, but it's no Tim Krul for tomorrow. And that's obviously a situation which, purely framed in terms of playing a game of FA Cup football against Coventry, Norwich will be able to manage reasonably confidently or comfortably. I mean, Daniel Barden will obviously have to come in. That's not ideal, but it's doable. But it's obviously moving forward now. It's those 2 players, Krul principally for Cardiff next Saturday when they resume in the Championship. And of course, the fear now is, and we just touched on this before we went live, that once it moves from a scenario where it could be in the vicinity, it could be in the environment, but it's actually not permeated the camp, as it were. It's one thing, but now it's now actually in the camp, and there's Norwich players who've gone down with this. And obviously, first and foremost, it's about their health. And Daniel talked about this, that the priority is really those players and that member of staff, that they get back to full fitness and that they feel well within themselves. And ultimately, that is really all that matters in this. But, there is clearly now questions about Norwich's resumption of the Championship season, principally. And we'll see how this plays out in the next few days. Daniel said on Tim Krul, he's had a few symptoms. Tim obviously took to social media very soon after Norwich's announcement at midday to say he was feeling a bit fatigued. And we'll see where we are a week on from now. As Daniel said, in terms of the logistics and the legalities around self-isolation, he would be available, having gone into self-isolation at the start of this week when they did that block of testing. But is he in a physical state to be in consideration? Daniel says that he'll need to, be back in training and prove that is the case. So, yeah, first and foremost, it's about these individuals, and you wish them all the best from a health point of view. But there clearly has to be now questions, and I think it's no coincidence that while there's been mandatory testing around these FA Cup ties this weekend, the EFL and the PFA have obviously now rolled out or announced that they're going to be rolling out twice weekly testing from here on. Because if they don't do that, and if clubs aren't en masse able to get a handle on where the symptoms are within their first team squads principally, but obviously the whole support staff that go around that, then, we've seen an ever-increasing tick-up of games being postponed around the festive period. That's only going to go one way. If you look at where we are as as a country, as a society, in terms of escalating infection rates just in everyday life. It's not a huge surprise that it's now reached Norwich's squad, but from here, that we have to say there are huge question marks about how big an impact this leaves, not just this weekend, but more importantly, probably moving forward into the rest of the championship season.
Yeah, absolutely, and the nature with this new variant as well, which is that you basically have to be exposed to only a small bit of the virus and you catch it, which is obviously a slight concern. We don't know if it is the new variant that obviously Tim Krul and Adam Eady have tested positive for, but the main thing, as you say, is their health. And although, as Daniel Farke said, they're doing well, the fact that Tim Krul is showing a bit of fatigue maybe doesn't bode too well for his return against Cardiff, but of course these things can develop fairly quickly. I'm going to delve very rapidly into a couple of comments we've had on this, both from Facebook. Dan has said, what I thought was interesting is Daniel Farke said the Norwich have been stricter than the recommended amount of EFL testing. EFL have been poor this season, have been weak on this. They've only started mandated testing on the 4th. And then Stephen Noakes has followed up with, why would a one-off 2-week suspension of football not be a good idea? It will clear out the cases in football. I get the cheering up fans, but and this is a very serious point. We've heard this idea of a circuit breaker being proposed in football quite a bit. Where do you stand on it, Pad? Because the EFL have released figures today: 112 positive tests from their 72 clubs. Obviously, as you said, they've had to do that. It's been mandatory this week, and of course, the PFA have brought in now sort of twice weekly testing as well, which hopefully will control the situation a little bit more. But do you feel that football is in a situation where it does need to be put on pause for a little bit, especially given maybe the wider picture of what the country is going through at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, if it was to, if circuit breakers, as you rightly say, the phrase has been bandied about, if that was to happen, I think most people probably would be supportive of that. And on that very specific point, that was what I put to Daniel this last Friday, pre the Barnsley game, and he felt, if I just recall rightly, that it probably hadn't reached the point where, in terms of the widespread nature of this across the whole of professional football, it probably necessitated a circuit breaker. But you roll it on 7 days, as you quoted them figures there. It'll be interesting now where the numbers are in terms of next week and the week after, when we get into regular routine testing, and if there seems to be no discernible fall off in the numbers, then I think the calls for a circuit breaker will continue to grow. We all know, as I say, the backdrop to where we are as a country at the minute, and the numbers, daily numbers, both infections and death rates, are absolutely horrendous. Higher than the first peak, and that probably hasn't even filtered through to the sort of the as it turned out, the 1 or 2 day release we had over Christmas in terms of the rules around social movement and bubbling. Those figures, sadly, probably haven't even filtered into the system. There's clearly a lag in terms of the vaccinations and how widely that's going to get rolled out beyond the priority group. So at this stage, I think it's becoming increasingly a possibility. But clearly, the method behind twice weekly testing from the EFL's point of view and the PFA is they want to try and avoid that, clearly. And you can get into the moral arguments around that, but the reason they want to avoid that is because they've already concertinaed this season into less months than they would comparable to any other season because of the overhang from last season's extended football season. Very hard to see if they were to break for any length of time that they would be able to complete this season. They're running up against the rearranged Euros, and that's purely I'm just talking in football terms. That's just from a football aspect. If we're talking in terms of health and well-being, then there is no debate. If it gets to a point where football is unable to arrest the increasing rates in terms of infections, then it becomes almost a redundant argument or a redundant debate. I think it will reach a point, and it might not even be a 2-week break, because we had the many months as we all went through in terms of football season being suspended. It might end up that way, and if it does, then who knows where we are purely in terms of, as I say, keep stressing, there's a football debate we're having here, but there's a much more important debate about where we are as a society and getting through the other side and hopefully getting to a point where vaccinations reach millions and millions of levels that we can begin to get back to some semblance of normality, and that applies equally to football as it does the rest of the world. So, but in the right here, right now, who knows? We none of us can really foresee where we're going to go with this in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months. So, it's something that's been talked about, and if the numbers do not start to head in a positive direction, it will continue to be talked about. But right here, right now, there's no chance of a circuit breaker. Clearly, the football authorities have put their faith in mass routine testing as the way out of this in the interim. We'll see if they're right on that one.
Yeah, and let's get absolutely straight. Testing's only now being rolled out to the FL clubs because the PFA is paying for it, isn't it? It's not something that we've seen prior to that. Some clubs, and I know Norwich's opponents, Coventry, have been testing regularly. Norwich have tested fairly regularly, but there'll be some clubs even at League Two level who maybe haven't tested since the first sort of few weeks of the season, and that clearly is a concern given the current state of society in this country. Again, maybe those rules needed to be reviewed a little bit earlier, but again, even if we are talking about circuit breaker, then what does that 2 weeks look like? Can clubs still go in and train? Because then that doesn't necessarily break off the routes of transmission. And then after they come back from it, are you then just saying, right, there's a game on the Saturday, crack on? Because then there's going to be questions of fitness and sports science that comes into it as well. So it would be a very difficult logistical challenge, I think. And I can even see some of the comments we're getting now very split on this issue. We'll hear from Daniel Farke in a moment, but just before we finish this sort of section on the coronavirus rules, I've seen a few people suggest that this maybe shouldn't be taken as a coincidence, given that Norwich played Barnsley last weekend, who themselves had a few positive cases, who played Rotherham, who had a few positive cases. That's quite, for me, it feels like too simplistic of you to take, doesn't it? It's maybe not necessarily as simple as, well, Norwich played Barnsley, therefore this is where these cases have come from, because as you could say throughout society, really there are so many possibilities as to how COVID got into Colney. It's not necessarily because Norwich played a team with a few out last weekend. Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, we I don't think it's an area we need to go into because we're not fully availed of all the facts and the information. And that's an easy link to make in terms of links in the chain to previous teams who've played previous teams who ultimately have had to call off games because of COVID outbreaks. That isn't our understanding from what we've been led to believe in terms of a background briefing, in terms of the source of these cases for Norwich. So I think we'd leave it there. Anything else is pure conjecture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just speculation, isn't it? Let's hear from Daniel Farke. Here's what he had to say today about those 3 positive cases.
Yeah, I can confirm that we have 3 positive cases. I can also confirm that Tim Krul is one of them. And we have also a second player who is involved and 1 staff member. A second player is Adam Ida. So they both are tested positive. They are isolating, meanwhile, since a few days because we had the tests in the beginning of the week. And so the most important topic is that they both feel more or less well. So Tim has had some symptoms in the beginning, but it's not getting worse. It feels a bit like a cold for him, and the most important topic is that he recovers pretty quick, and the same also for Adam and also for our staff member. So more important than anything else right now that they go through this. So all I can say so far, it looks quite okay. So it looks like they have a bit like a blocked nose and something like this, but it's not too bad, but we take it serious. And I think Tim also came out on social media and said, okay, listen, you feel really poor when you have it, and you feel a bit like having a flu or something. This is really a serious case, and stay disciplined. And he's totally spot on.
There you go, Daniel Farke on the positive cases. I was just reading a few of the comments that we've had on this, and I'm sure that our producer Tony will flip a few on screen just as we continue this debate. It's a shame we can't have a circuit breaker from the transfer window in many regards. Some of what I've read about Emi Buendia over the last week, but we won't delve too much into that. I want to talk about, and again, we kind of touched upon it, the goalkeeping situation. Tim Krul's positive test does accelerate Norwich City's search for that second choice. We've got some news on Michael McGovern as well today. He's had surgery on his hamstring. 12 to 14 weeks he's going to be out for. Dan Barden, as you said, is going to start tomorrow, but you wouldn't necessarily want to throw him into a championship game, particularly the way that Cardiff play, very physical. Are you expecting this goalkeeper search to get sort of accelerated over the next week or so? It kind of feels like that's the natural conclusion to take given the news we've been given today.
Yeah, and I think Daniel, the way he was talking in terms of that aspect of the whole keeper situation, would like it resolved before Cardiff. You did the piece where they're clearly looking at the boy Nyland. Apologies for the pronunciation. Who was at Villa recently. We'd been led to believe at the start of the week the free agent route is the route they want to go down for various reasons in terms of the whole overlay of the Brexit rules now and probably the cost dimension to that as well. So there's not that many. If you then drill down, you did that excellent piece earlier in the week about potential options. It's a fairly slim pool of available options, and there's no doubt they want to do something as soon as because. If to take the thread of what we were just discussing pre that Daniel video we just watched there, if Tim Krul isn't available this time next Friday, Michael McGovern isn't going to be available. So it would be Daniel Barden, probably backed up by John McCracken, two very inexperienced keepers, being exposed to a very, very physical, robust Cardiff side. We saw the problems they caused from set pieces at Carrow Road most recently. Okay, Norwich won the game very impressively in the end, but there is no doubt Neil Harris' team would be looking to probe for vulnerability if it's Daniel Barden in the goal next Saturday. And I don't think it's probably fair to expose that young man to that this early in his career. A cup game is in isolation of its own right, as it was the League Cup tie at Luton at the start of the season. I think that's one scenario, but it's certainly not a championship fixture at Cardiff. They will need to move fairly swiftly on that. And by all accounts, the likes of an Island, Robbie Elliott, was it Robbie Elliott? Rob Elliott, yeah. National keeper, yeah. And obviously the boy Anik as well, Ben Anik, who was here previously. They're the sort of names, but the reality is there'll be other clubs who probably may need a keeper option. So it's not as straightforward, I don't think. But one thing is Stuart Webber's a very decisive character when it comes to bringing bringing deals over the line. Sorry, so yeah, I would be frankly surprised if by this time next Friday we were sat here discussing Cardiff and there isn't a new keeper in the building, because I think the urgency of that has been underlined again now just by what's happened in the last 24, 48 hours around Tim Krul. Daniel was talking about when he first mentioned they needed to go into the window post Michael McGovern's injury, that of course the keeper situation in this league with so many games, as Tim Krul demonstrated, a muscle injury, you're missing 6 or 7 games. But sadly, the reality is now we have to overlay the COVID dimension in all of this as well, that you could, as Norwich are currently now, foreseeably be without a goalkeeper for a 2-week, 3-week period, maybe longer. So, yeah, I don't think Norwich will want to leave themselves light by this time next week. So it'll be, I think, pretty swift how they move after Saturday's game for me in this area.
Let's speak about the links to Nyland then. Obviously, we reported yesterday a goalkeeper who post Project Restart was playing in goal in the Premier League for Aston Villa. Some people will probably know his incidents against Sheffield United, where he carried the ball over the line and Hawkeye didn't pick it up. In terms of an option, 30 years of age, 6'4", Norwegian international, also with a settled status because of his links to Villa, would qualify for a work permit anyway. For you, is that the best option of the ones we've talked about? Rob Elliott and Ben Anik, probably the other ones from a domestic perspective. Probably the best option, but equally difficult to do because other clubs are interested and will maybe be able to offer him a bit more certainty over first team football, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a very difficult dynamic because, with the greatest respect to those guys, Tim Krul is the main man here, and if Tim Krul is available, Tim Krul will play. So, I'm sure they would all back their ability to come in and contest for a spot, but essentially Norwich are asking a potential new keeper to come in and essentially warm the bench, and somebody like him who was playing in the Premier League. I mean, I found it, when I discovered he was a free agent, I find it very strange that he's fallen that far out of favour. Now, I know there was a back issue there as well that he's had to go and get resolved, whether contractually he wanted to let his contract run down, whether it was less Villa didn't want him, maybe he just felt, he might be in a stronger bargaining position. And of course, then the whole landscape has changed dramatically with the COVID and the Brexit impact. But I was very surprised just in terms of the guy's ability, because I thought he looked a very decent shot stopper. There's areas of his game where it probably wasn't as good, but for whatever reason he's available. So yeah, of the names mentioned, domestic free agent options, I think he would be top of the tree. But I think that's why there probably is a bit of interest. And as I say, how do you convince him to come if essentially what you're saying is, yeah, we need you to come in, be a good tourist because Tim Krul's going to play. So we'll see. But it might be something they can sell in terms of, well, you're without a club, you've had this surgery on your back, just come and train and maybe get a game here or there and almost get yourself back up to speed for when the summer window comes round, and then you might be a more desirable option because you've proved maybe your fitness in, albeit maybe a small sample of games, because ultimately he does need to find a club, he does need to be playing football, and Norwich might be a vehicle which will allow him to do that, even if it wasn't, to be fair, at Norwich, if it was only going to be a short-term deal. So, yeah, it's not an easy thing that Norwich are trying to attempt here, but they do need to act because, you do not want a scenario where it's potentially Dan Barden for a block of championship games, because he's clearly not ready at this stage, given where Norwich are at the top of the table and what they're trying to achieve. That's really injecting a level of uncertainty into the proceedings, and I don't think Farke or Webber or any Norwich fan, for that matter, would want that the other side of this FA Cup time.
Will it be easier to sell it to him or another? And I think there are certainly a few names on that list, and led to believe it's a fairly long list. Is it easier to sell because of this? Because they can say, well, you might get an opportunity at Cardiff, and then there's a real opportunity for you to put your marker down and try and get a run in the side. Does that make it easier to sell? Because ultimately, as you've kind of mapped out there, the situation is still going to be the same if Tim Krul is considered the number one. Yeah,
and of course, as Daniel has touched on before, in the sense of hopefully keeping some players, that they look at Norwich, they see they're top of the table. Okay, 4 or 5 months from now, with a fair wind, without getting complacent, they could be back in the Premier League, and that's a tempting, probably, factor for some of those younger players who maybe contrast with the window in the summer. Nobody really knew how Norwich were going to fare in this first part of the season. You've just come out of the Premier League. You probably feel you've done enough on a personal level to maybe warrant staying in the Premier League. It's a different dynamic now, and that, in terms of attracting a potential keeper or a potential left back, could go in Norwich's favour. That okay, in the here and now, it maybe is Tim Krul, but I'm sure an Ireland would back his own ability to maybe put the challenge down to Tim Krul in the longer term. And if he's joining a club who, with a fair wind, they're in the Premier League come May, then he might feel, well, it's not a bad opportunity in the mid to longer term, even if in the short term, Tim Krul is very definitely the Norwich number one. Tim Krul was in a similar scenario at Brighton, where he was their number two. Matt Ryan was the man who was playing, and he had to get away to try and get some football. But the reality is, he isn't getting any younger. I know he's still got a few years ahead of him, but he has had his injury problems, serious ones at that, and it's probably still seen as an opportunity for a keeper like Nyland, who has played in the Premier League very recently, still got a few decent years in him if he's only 30. Elliott and Anik, not so much. I think they would be stopgap measures, but if they go more for somebody who's still got a bit of mileage left, then ultimately it'd be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Krul, when the challenge was put down to him with Ralph Farman coming in, albeit on loan, he responded magnificently, and basically Farman didn't get a look in really. So that would be interesting, because ultimately, there's another factor at play here. Tim Krul needs to be pushed. It's not enough, with the greatest respect to Michael McGovern, that he comes in as and when. But we all know who the number one is in that relationship. And if you're maybe Daniel or Stuart, you just maybe need to, as Timu maybe has responded to Jordan Hugo coming in and Adam Eder developing into a genuine first-team option, competition is what it's all about. We see that in other areas of Norwich's squad, and it's no coincidence. It's probably driven the performance levels to this point to a team who are leading the rest. And certainly in the keeping department, they probably do need to inject a bit more competition. And so, yes, there's a short-term imperative to all of this, but I'm sure the planning also has to factor in the mid and the longer term, and how this could play out in terms of, Tim Krul feeling that there is a bit of heat to retain his place in the side.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's got 23 appearances in the Championship. Was first choice for Villa, and then ruptured his Achilles, so missed the second half of that season where they went up. A few comments on him. Phil has on Facebook has said should have kept quiet about Krul. Now it's public knowledge that we're desperate for a goalkeeper. Equally, free agents are desperate for a club, so it's a two-way street, and Norwich are looking at free agents. So there you go. Stephen Noakes has said, as a free agent, I guess he's not earning anything, so wages are not an issue. Canary Mary Watson has said, hi, we have a goalkeeper conundrum, but our 4 defensive players, I feel, protected Michael McGovern well. So I believe young Daniel Bunn is an international under-18 keeper, but he's still very talented. And an interesting question from Adam Potter. I'll get your take on this, Pad, and then we'll hear from Daniel Farke about this issue. He said, do you think it's worth trying to get John Ruddy back with a view to planning next season in the Premier League? He's, of course, sitting on the bench at Wolves at the moment, isn't he? Still lives locally. Funnily enough, I won't disclose my location, but I sometimes see him parked up next door. Not in recent times, but obviously pre-COVID, I think his wife used to go and get some beauty treatments next door. So there you go. I know he's still local to the area. What do you think about John Ruddy potentially coming back, or is that a ship that sailed?
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah. How old is John now? Is it early 30s?
Oh, I'll tell you what, you Phil, and I'll Google it.
Yeah. So that immediately springs to mind in terms of,
34.
Yeah, so you're no reflection on their respective abilities, but it feels like a Michael McGovern type of scenario. Again, I think they probably need to look a bit more younger in terms of, again, the competitive element for Tim Krul. And the other thing would be the financial package. Ryan Bennett, his former teammate at Wolves and, of course, Norwich. Before that, he was mooted with Norwich in the summer when there was talk of the central defensive area of the squad maybe being a little bit in need of TLC, and that was a non-starter because of the finances involved. So they've been on very, very good money at Wolves, both of those players. So I just think how Norwich are trying to structure it in terms of the wages, even if they went into the Premier League, I still think that'll probably be beyond them in terms of the finances. The only flip side, as you rightly say, John Ruddy is still based here, and if he's at that stage of his career where he would fancy coming back. I know he's talked about in the past. That's not something he would be actually against. But I don't think on a Weber watch that's something that they're loath to do, is to bring back former players. I think it's times have moved on, and it's more about ultimately trying to develop players, isn't it? And that would kind of go against that ethos a little bit, I think, if you're to bring in John Ruddy.
It's a really difficult position to fill, because you've also got kind of a real group of young players coming through, and I'm kind of writing my column on this at the moment. You've got obviously Dan Barden, Ashton Oxborough is still around, Archie Mayer, who has done very well at Kings Lynn this season, and I know they're very happy with him. John McCracken as well. So you've got a real sort of body of goalkeepers there that are coming through. So it's kind of about ensuring that you don't block their path of progression as well. So it's going to be an interesting one. Let's hear from Daniel Farke. He did again confirm that they're in for a goalkeeper today, but he's keen not to rush the signing. Although, as we've kind of spoken about, for the reasons that we've learnt of today, it kind of feels like that process may be accelerated a little bit over the week.
We are in the market, and it makes definitely sense to stay aware if there's a possibility during this January transfer window to bring a goalkeeper in. Yeah, because of this major injury of Michael McGovern. But we'll just do this if it makes sense. So we are good in numbers. So we have our young goalkeepers. John McCracken has signed a new contract. We have Daniel Barden. We have Tim Krul. Then hopefully as soon as possible also available. But even during this crazy times, even COVID proves that it makes sense to stay away, and it would make sense to bring another goalkeeper in. But we will just do it if we got the feeling, okay, it's also a major step up to the lads that we have, because we don't need just to bring another number in, because we have our young lads and we trust them. It would just make sense if a goalkeeper is available, who is then there and has already delivered on this level, and is also a major step up to what we've got so far. So for that, it's not. I think be there with a good decision is more important than to be there with a quick decision. So for that, we take our time in order to prepare everything. The good thing is we just have this FA Cup game, and there's a little break in the league, so we don't have to rush anything.
I've just seen Luke's comment on Facebook where he says maybe Jakob Sorensen would be good in goal. He seems to have done well out of position so far. It's a good shout. Let's turn our attentions to this game tomorrow, Pad. I know, particularly with your Coventry hat on, this is a competition that you think fondly of. You take any opportunity to talk about 1987, so we won't. We won't go on about that. But from a Norwich City perspective, obviously the league is of paramount importance this season. But Daniel Farke is a coach who likes cup competitions. Based from how he spoke today, how did you feel he would kind of tackle this FA Cup tie?
Yeah, I got the sense he's probably wrestling a little bit with his own desire to go very strong, because his record in England is second to none. I mean, in fact, I can't think of a recent Norwich manager who's treated the cup competitions with as much respect as he has, in terms of not just saying the right things, but actually his team selections underline that he is serious about progress. And as he took us down a bit of a trip down memory lane last season, that run to the FA Cup quarter-finals, the magnificent occasion at Tottenham, the penalty shootout win in front of 9,000. That go back a bit earlier, those hard-fought wins at Preston and Burnley. Preston, Adam Ida's headline-grabbing hat-trick display that day. And, of course, then Manchester United, sadly with no fans present, but pushed them all the way, looked like it was heading to penalties, and just got done deep in stoppage time, which was arguably probably day and night in terms of the performances they produced in the Project Restart era. Sadly, the league performances were diabolical, but that was probably as good as they could manage when football resumed. So it is a competition which Daniel really, really wants to do well in. There's no doubt about it. That came through again today, and he said there won't be 11 changes from last week against Barnsley, but by the same token, he also did say, we're in a pandemic. We've had an abbreviated season, 46 league games, and the load on the players is such, the injuries are taking their toll, that he has to be mindful of that. So I think there will be, I don't know, if I was spread betting it, maybe 7 to 8 changes from last Saturday. And you just hope, for me, while yes, of course, Norwich would love to get through. I'm not sure I'd want Norwich to get through, but that's a different matter. But ultimately, I don't see any value from playing Buendia, playing Pookie, Aarons, maybe even Cantwell. I think Grant Hanley could do with a break tomorrow, because ultimately the be all and end all. We don't need to go down the cul-de-sac of debating the allure that's been lost from the FA Cup down the years. But ultimately, it is about getting back to the Premier League for Norwich. It's absolutely imperative, given the financial issues in round not having any revenue from supporters. It's millions and millions of pounds of revenue which is not flowing into Norwich's coffers. Yes, they've managed it prudently to this point. They've also got a few aces in their back pocket in terms of players they could sell if they had to, in terms of the financial shortfalls they need to plug. But it'd be a lot easier to do that if they're back in the Premier League and all the attendant revenue that comes with that. So that has to be in his thoughts in terms of his key players tomorrow. But I still think, we'll see a more than good enough side to get through. Coventry have got a few injuries themselves, I believe. Mark Robbins will probably be also prioritising the league for different reasons. It's about staying in the division for them this season. And as Daniel said today, since the 1-1 league draw down here at Carrow Road late November, they've gone on and had some decent results and beat Millwall away last week, which is no mean feat. We all saw how tough Millwall were to break down at Carrow Road before Christmas. So it'll be changes on both sides. But, a lot of these games, it's about the mindset as much as the personnel. And I think Norwich will go into that game with the mindset that they want to progress. And ultimately, we can drill down into maybe who might be playing. I think it sounded like Barley Mumba might be getting a start tomorrow. It sounds like he's come back into full team training after his knee issues and been very strong in training this week. Daniel talked about his youth and that he probably doesn't need a huge amount of training sessions to get back up to speed. And there's no doubt he was catching the eye prior to, unfortunately, getting injured on the training ground. So there's a young man who could grab his opportunity tomorrow. And then we're talking about him in terms of Cardiff and moving forward. So within the overall, can they progress to the next round? It might also be about, one or two players putting their hands up in terms of the league battles ahead. And it's going to be an interesting lineup selection call from him tomorrow. But I think ultimately, I can't think there'd be any Norwich fan who would trade cut progress for going back to the Premier League, surely. So that has to be, when push comes to shove and the team news drops tomorrow, that has to be uppermost in his thoughts, I think, is protecting those really indispensable players and not taking any chances with anybody else with Cardiff on the horizon for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been interesting to see the split in managers this week. You tend to find those in who are struggling a little bit view this competition as a real chance to build a bit of momentum or a little bit of escapism. I saw Gareth Ainsworth in particular saying about how he wanted a cup run, and equally you've got Norwich at the top end of the division who could maybe do without it, and that's kind of where the FA Cup is at the moment. In terms of Norwich City's injuries, there are a few players included in that bulletin today that Daniel Farke delivered that maybe some of us were expecting to play and to be exposed to some minutes. I mean, Kieran Dowell is one of them. Lucas Rupp, Marco Stiepermann. Obviously, Josh Martin's not going to play because of he's currently got a cold, and I think in the current climate it's maybe not wise. But certainly, Dowell, Rupp, and Stiepermann. I've seen various predicted 11s throughout the week. They were all three players that were in there. So do you think those injuries and those setbacks are going to maybe cause some of those frontline options that may not necessarily have played to be pushed back into the starting 11? I'm thinking someone maybe like Ollie Skipp in that scenario.
Yeah, possibly. I think what it absolutely does is take that man there. Ollie Skipp will have to now be on the bench if he's not in the 11. I think whereas Daniel might have allowed one or two an actual weekend off and not had to call on him in terms of the 18, I think the numbers will dictate that probably isn't going to be the case. I just think maybe he goes Tete tomorrow and a guy who has been excellent in the last 3 or 4 games, but prior to that, obviously had to bide his time, and that's Kenny McLean. Rupp and Skipp had been the double act that had driven them forward sort of through September, October, November. So ultimately, it's all surprising if it's McLean and Alex Tete in those midfield two. Vrancic, for me, he needs to play football if he's really going to stamp his authority on that 10 role. If there's no Stiepermann, there's no Dowell. You surely don't want to be playing Emi Buendia tomorrow or Todd Cantwell if you can avoid it. Of course, the Josh Martin one is problematic in that area of the pitch. Obviously, Poeta must come into his thoughts now for a start. And a guy we haven't mentioned, Donel Hernandez. Daniel said he's trained this week. He's had this adductor issue. Has been out for a few months now. Said he wasn't an option for the starting 11, but he definitely did talk him up as an option for the 18. So, yeah, that's positive news. But I think the reality is maybe he could still pull the key players out of his 11. But I think a Pookie, for example, and Aarons, a Hanley, I think you'd probably still have to have them on the bench because it might be required that depending on how the game plays out, you get to deep into the second half, then there might be a scenario which requires those lads to be entered into the pitch. But, in an ideal world, I think if you're Daniel Farke, you don't want to play any of those lads tomorrow. Just let them, have a breather because they're far too important for the championship games ahead. But, there's no doubt those three you mentioned, Rupp, Stiepermann and Dowell, it does limit his room for manoeuvre in terms of the rotation aspect of it. And bit concerning, really, the 2 bulletins, certainly on Dowell. Well, not so much Dowell, but Stiepermann. He's had this problem with sort of initially an ear infection, but then his balance has been affected intermittently. He's had problems with his neck, feeling nauseous. And Daniel basically said today that start of the week they tried to plug him straight in and then up the intensity. And as soon as the workload increased, he started to complain of feeling sick and dizzy again. So it's reached a point now they feel as a sports science and a medical unit, they've done all they seemingly can do. And he's got to now go and be assessed by specialists and just try to get to the bottom of whatever those issues are. And that doesn't lead you to think he's going to be back anytime soon. And if Dowell is out, Daniel said just for these next 2 games, but, that has to be a doubt as well for me, because if he's had to go and have minor clean-out surgery on that original ankle op, which kept him out for 3 months, then I don't think we can, with confidence, sat here right now, say he's going to be back after the Cardiff game. So, it feels like we've been talking about that number 10 position from, probably since Andre Duda came in and bombed spectacularly last season. So if there's no Stiepermann and no Dowell moving forward, then, Mario Vrancic's influence and importance begins to grow ever thus, doesn't it? So, But that's the way it is. Mario would feel he's more than good enough to be in that side and dictating games and leaving his impression on the games. And I still personally don't think, despite him having a bit more of a run in recent times, I don't think overall he's really doing enough to feel that, he could be the answer to that number 10 role. I think there's glimpses of his quality. We can all see that. Some of his passes is excellent. We know what he's like on set pieces. But we're talking about a Barley Mumba there a bit earlier. Mario Branch's plays tomorrow. Let's see if he can really, stamp his authority on that, and then that he can then maybe roll into Cardiff with a bit more confidence that he could be the man in that number 10 role. Because there's no doubt if he really hit a consistent team of output, he's got the talent, no doubt, to really, really drag Norwich onwards and upwards.
Yeah, I've got a feeling we may see Todd Cantwell tomorrow out of necessity. I don't think there's much chance of Emi Buendia playing, but I can certainly see, given that Todd has maybe had he's had the injury, hasn't he? So maybe could benefit of a game or two for confidence. Interested to hear what you guys think in terms of the starting 11. So get your starting 11s in, and we'll flash a few up on the screen as we go. In terms of those coming back, you mentioned the two, Onel Hernandez and Barley Mumba. I know Daniel Farke has kind of stressed in recent times how much he kind of wanted a little bit of pace on the bench. Obviously, Plachetto has been out as well, so he's kind of missed that. How much of a boost will Onel Hernandez be to Norwich City if they can get him back and fit and firing? Because 8 goals and 8 assists last time he was in the Championship. He was a pretty productive source of output for them. Was
it as many as that? 8 goals and 8 assists?
You're making me doubt myself, but I'm pretty sure it was that.
Well, it's just
I'll double check.
Yeah, I'm not disputing what you would say, Connor. Very rarely would do that, but that's always my issue with him. Is just his productivity. He had so much potential with that raw athleticism and the pace he's got. And when it knits together, I remember the game at Middlesbrough when they won 1-0 on the sort of the homeward turn of the title-winning season, and he was the difference that day. And, when he produces that, then you think, this is a guy really who should be a shoe-in for the 11. But it hasn't quite, I don't feel, in his entire Norwich career. And he's not been helped. He's had punctured with injury episodes where he's been sidelined, which will have sort of stalled his momentum. But, he could be a big, moving forward, not just beyond tomorrow, but, if he stays fit, him and Puerta, they could be game-changing options moving forward, because I think when it's clicking and it's the smoothness of Buendia and Cantwell and Vrancic, and like Cardiff recently, that day they were excellent and really put Cardiff to the sword. But there'll be other opponents where that's not quite the template that's going to be breaking down, very resolute, obdurate Championship teams, and you probably could do with Puerta or Hernandez just to offer a different problem, to opposition, stretch the play, that you can go on the counter a bit more with those sort of players in your side, and it's about variety. And the more variety Norwich have moving forward, I think the better, because you can see when it goes down the stretch. We saw it 2 years ago. It's quite tight, quite tense a lot of the games, and you just need something a bit different, and those lads can definitely provide it. But for me, with those two wide players, it's going to be about productivity, and I think for me, it's still Buendia and Cantwell in those two wider roles of a number 10. But with those two to inject into the mix is, for Daniel, must be a very satisfying thought, I would have thought.
Yeah, I've actually just had a look. I've done an Ellis disservice. It was 8 goals and 10 assists last time he was in the Championship. So that's
assists.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is some figures. They seem to have gone under the radar a little bit. Certainly in 40 games as well, which is pretty good going. That's pretty much a goal contribution in 1 in 2 matches. Which if he was a striker, would be touting him with some big money moves. But there you go. Paddy, finally, then looking ahead to this FA Cup game, how do you feel it will go for Norwich? It's one that I kind of feel, because of the approach of the two sides, may go the distance. Of course, no replays this year. It's straight to is it straight to penalties, or have we got extra time as well? Do you know?
Time, mate. Yeah, I think it's extra time.
Yeah. So it could be one that goes the distance. 5 subs as well, with a 6th if needed in extra time if it goes that way. How do you see this one going? Obviously, you're your boyhood club Coventry as well coming to town. I don't think they'll be similarly to Norwich. Their focus won't necessarily be on progression. How do you see this going? Because I kind of feel like the expectation will still be with Norwich to get through, particularly being at home.
Yeah, I don't see. I mean, it probably will be different personnel, but I don't see it a drastically different game to what we saw in the league. You know, where Coventry will try and be quite obdurate without the ball, but I felt they were reasonably progressive as well. I mean, he's not playing tomorrow, I don't think, but they played wing backs, and the right wing back Farke Darbo was very good that day. Really pushed Sorensen back, and they carried an attacking threat, no doubt about it. And probably on balance, trying to be neutral here, they probably did merit, albeit it was a late equaliser. They probably did merit on the balance of play that day. I think Norwich didn't really slip the gears they needed to put them away when they got 1-0 up that day. And I don't foresee any other type of game, really. I can't see one team or the other having a comfortable passage. So it will just be maybe, a tight game deep into the second half, and then, whether it's an individual bit of magic or, a mistake. Don't really want extra time and penalties. It's going to be a bit cold out there tomorrow. As fortunate as we are, of course, to be in the stadiums at the minute. But, I think ultimately, certainly from Norwich's point of view, if they were in the mythical hat on Monday when the draw for the fourth round is made, I'm sure they'd be satisfied, but it wouldn't be a huge kink in their season if they were not to be in there. And really, I guess if you're Daniel, you want to see maybe like a Mamba type player, maybe show something that you can bank and look to use in the championship running. And the other thing is you don't want any more injuries, because that's something that would be really, in the current climate, very unhelpful in terms of the main business, which is ultimately getting back to the Premier League. So, yeah, it pains me to say it, but it's one of those games that I think could easily drift by tomorrow, and ultimately, I don't think it's one that will live too long in the memory. I mean, it is live, isn't it? So at least people will be able to consume it, not just on the iFollow platforms. But I think the BT Sport team are going to have their job cut out trying to hype that game up for me. But and that's me saying that as a Cov fan. So I know what you think, mate, but I just think probably similar to the league game, and then hopefully Norwich just have a little bit more quality that they can just get their noses in front and get through, and then we'll see what the fourth round brings on Monday.
It probably won't be too dissimilar from the side that Norwich played against Coventry last time. Of course, last time they faced the Sky Blues, it was in the sort of height of their injury crisis, wasn't it? Where they had sort of 9-10 players out. Marco Stiepermann playing up front. Obviously, that won't be the case tomorrow. I think Jordan Hugo will probably get a run out. But yeah, I'm with you really. I think it's going to be a little bit slow, and in many ways it's going to be nice to see those sort of players that perhaps we haven't seen a lot of. Jordan Hugo is a really prime example of that. Get some minutes, and hopefully he can get on the score sheet as well, because obviously it's been a while since he scored a goal. But I think Norwich will progress, but I can see it being a 1-0, 2-1 and quite drab, if I'm honest. But let's hope that's not the case. Of course, we'll be there. Pinken.com is the place to go. We'll have a live blog tomorrow if you don't have access to the TV platform that the game is on. And of course, we'll have the report, the analysis, and all the reaction as well. Thank you very much for watching. Pad, thank you very much for joining me. Stay safe out there. It's scary times at the moment, but fingers crossed we can get to a stage where we can have Carrow Road and football grounds full soon. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Friday evening. See you soon.